find your place. Let me tell you what we're talking about today. We're in the fourth week of a teaching series called A Great Church. And quite simply, we're talking about what it takes to be a great church. And we began by acknowledging that hardly anybody wants to be a part of a bad church or a really mediocre church. We want to be a part of a great church. And one of the things that we were excited to learn is that there's no one-size-fits-all formula for a great church. They can be big, they can be small, they can have historic buildings, brand new buildings, no buildings. They can be 186 years old, they can be brand new, they can be independent, different denominations. But great churches, although they can vary in many ways, tend to have a few things in common. First, we talked about the idea that great churches always remember that they belong to Jesus. Even though great churches are here to please, are here to serve people, they're ultimately here to please Jesus. Was having dinner with some friends last night who've been a part of a lot of different churches, and they were talking to me about a couple different times when they've been heartbroken for churches that divided. And in both cases, they said there was at least one person in the church who thought it belonged to them. And so they fought for what they wanted in their church. And so a few weeks ago, we just acknowledged that this church belongs to Jesus. Any great church doesn't just wear his name on the sign, but they really live for him. And then for the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at these word pictures in the Bible that are meant to give us an idea of what the church is meant to be, who we are, and what we're supposed to do. What's our identity? What's our purpose? And 2 weeks ago, we talked about the church as a family, right? The church is a family. As we come into a relationship with Jesus, he says, now you're all related to each other. You're all brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles and mothers and fathers. If you belong to me, Jesus said, then you belong to each other. Last Sunday, we spent a good bit of time talking about the church as the body of Jesus, right? Jesus left the earth. He took his resurrected body with him, but he left us behind to be his hands and his feet and his mouth and to carry on what he began. We said, you know, everybody in the body is an important part. We all bring something a little bit different to the table, and it takes all of us to represent Jesus to the world. Now, we're going to look at one final word picture today, and I'm just going to start by telling you it's not quite as user-friendly as these last two, because everybody has been a part of a family. Good family, bad family, mediocre family. We all know what it's like to be a part of a family. Every one of us, as far as, you know, I see reality, has a body this morning. We all know what it's like to have a body. But today's word picture might be outside of our normal frame of reference. And I'm going to introduce you to it this way. I'm going to put a word up on the screen, and I just want you internally to yourself to notice the very first thing you think of when you see this word. Okay, here's the word. It's the word priest. What do you think of when you see or hear the word priest? Some of us might think of kind of a modern religious leader, Catholic priest, Anglican priest, Episcopal priest. Some of us might hear the word priest and think kind of an ancient cultic, you know, kind of ritualistic leader.
Messenger of God.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Some of us might, Keith said messenger of God. Some of us might see the word priest, and because we've been a part of church for a while and studied the Old Testament, we might think of the Jewish priesthood. Here's what I'm curious about. How many of us, when we saw the word priest, thought of ourselves? How many of us thought, yeah, that's me. I'm a priest. Me neither. And nobody in first service either. And yet, as we're going to discover today, when God wants to describe the church and who it is and what it's supposed to do, this is actually one of the pictures that is given. The church are a bunch of priests. And there's no punchline after that. It's, you know, a bunch of priests don't walk into a bar. There's none of that, right? But we actually are a group of priests, believe it or not. This is how Peter frames it up in 1 Peter chapter 2. You're coming to Christ, the living stone, who was rejected by humans, but was chosen as precious by God. You come to him as living stones, a spiritual house that's being built into a holy priesthood. Continues later in verse 9. You are chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, people who belong to God. Okay, Jesus, what do you want your church to be? Well, Jesus says, look, everybody in my church, not only a part of the family, not only a part of the body, but they're all priests. Now, that's not something I'm used to thinking about very often. I don't think about priests, and yet this is an important picture of the New Testament. And it's one that isn't just from Peter, it occurs several times. So this morning, we're going to talk about what makes a great church. And what makes a great church is when everybody in the church acts like a priest, believe it or not. And you may have no idea what that means or what it requires, so we're going to spend some time talking about it. And I'm going to frame it up this way because I think it's a little more user-friendly. A great church blesses God and their neighbors. As we'll see later, this is what priests do. But a great church is full of people who make it their intention to bless God in worship and to bless people in God's name. Okay, so we're going to spend some time today talking about some of the basic characteristics of a priest. And since it's a biblical frame of reference, we'll look at what the priest in the Old Testament did and then see if and how and what out of all that might translate to us. Well, let's come back to our question. What was your favorite Halloween costume this year? Did you see any good ones? Maybe you put on a couple good ones. Here were a couple of my favorites. It was a family who dressed up as characters from Peter Pan. This is one of the families that actually helps with our Awana program. And Mom was Captain Hook, and Dad was Mr. Schnee, and then Peter Pan, Wendy, and Tinkerbell. Love that. At our trunk or treat, my favorite individual costume was, let me go back, we had a mini Michael Jackson. A little guy named Chance comes to our day school. And can I tell you that every time I saw him, like the opening bars from Billie Jean started playing in my head. And I just felt like I was supposed to sing that, but somehow I refrained most of the night. Yeah, whenever you see somebody dressed up, there's a question that you ask either out loud or internally, and it's this. So who are you supposed to be? Or what are you supposed to be if it doesn't look like you're a person? Who are you supposed to be? Well, maybe this is a helpful question to talk about what it means to be a priest. Who is a priest? Specifically, if we look at the Old Testament, who were the priests? How did they become a priest? Did they have like a Jewish career day? Did they get a scholarship to become a priest? Did they, was dad a priest and they kind of got drug into the family business? We actually can delve into a fascinating study. Some of you don't look like you'd be fascinated, but a fascinating study on priests in the Old Testament. We don't have time for that today. We're not going for the 3-hour sermon today. So I'm going to give you some very simple, basic answers. And if you're a Bible person, you would say, but there's more, and I would say, that's right, but we're going to stick to the shorter version today. Some very basic answers about who a priest was. How did you become a priest in the Jewish faith? The basic answer is, you were born into it. The Jewish priests were priests because of their family ties and bloodline. Probably heard of a guy named Moses. He was a famous deliverer of Israel. His brother was a guy named Aaron, and he functioned as the first Jewish priest. And if you follow along with the story of the Old Testament, God says, all right, Aaron, from now on, you and everybody in your family, you're the priest for the nation. If you weren't from Aaron's family, you didn't get to be a priest. Didn't matter if you felt a calling, if you had training, you had to be in the right family. Not only were Aaron's family the priests, but the bigger tribe they were a part of were the Levites, family of Levi, and they were all kind of given to be the priestly assistants. Right? So this is how you became a priest. You wanted to be a priest, you had to be related to Aaron. If you wanted to be an assistant, you had to be from the larger family of Levi. And yet, if you look in the Old Testament, there's also an idea that God thinks of all of his people as priests. Let me show you this passage. This is Exodus 19. This is a big moment for the Jewish nation. This is the moment when God's going to make a covenant with them. They come to Mount Sinai. God's on the top of the mountain. The mountain's kind of on fire. This is when the 10 Commandments come out. And God says, here's a message for my people. Moses, here's what you go tell my people. Moses went up the mountain to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. This is what you must say to the descendants of Jacob. Tell the Israelites, if you carefully obey me and are faithful to the terms of my promise, then out of all the nations, you will be my own special possession, even though the whole world is mine. God says, look, all the people belong to me, but I'm choosing you for a special relationship. You're actually going to be a witness to the rest of the world about how to live in relationship with me. And then he says this, you will be my kingdom of what? Priests in my holy nation. I mean, this is like the heartbeat of the relationship God wants to have with his people. Now, in the kingdom of priests, there's like a legal family of priests, Aaron, then the Levites, but all of you, you're my priest in my holy nation. If that sounds familiar, we've read similar language this morning from 1 Peter chapter 2. In fact, it almost sounds like plagiarism, students. This is something your teacher would flag you for. They would say, wait a minute, I've read this exact same language in another student's paper. Peter says, look, you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, people who belong to God. First, God speaks this identity to Israel, and then he speaks this same identity to the church. You are priests. Now, how did you become a priest? If you're a follower of Jesus, that's a part of your identity. I am, it's a part of my identity. What qualifies us to be priests? It's a pretty similar answer to what qualified people in the Old Testament. It's about family ties and bloodlines. Jesus, we're told, is the great high priest, and if you're a part of his family, you get to be a priest too. It's about bloodlines, not a bloodline of birth, but a bloodline of rebirth. I'm going to show you a couple passages from the book of Revelation. And it's funny, I very rarely teach from the book of Revelation. Honestly, I'm just not interested in all the fights about which interpretation is correct and is this literal or figurative or when do God's people disappear. I usually stay away from all that. I don't find it to be very productive. And yet almost every week in this series we come back to the book of Revelation for something. And what I found myself noticing this week is in the Old Testament there's this picture that God's people are priests. And in the New Testament, Peter says you're a kingdom of priests. And in the book of Revelation, which looks into the future, guess what language you find? It's exactly the same. This is Revelation 1:5. From Jesus Christ, the witness, the trustworthy one, the first to come back to life, and the ruler over the kings of the earth. Macedonia, election this Tuesday. We're electing a president. Do you want to know who's in charge of the president? There's Revelation. Jesus is over all the kings, all the queens, all the dictators, all the democratic elected officials, over all the earth. Hang in, don't get discouraged. Glory and power forever and ever belong to the one who loves us. Catch this. He's freed us from our sins by his blood and has made us a kingdom. And what's the next word? Priests. Really weird. I never hear churches talk about that. In Revelation basically says Jesus shed his blood to free you and to free me and to make us priests. Well, maybe it's just there. Maybe this is just a one-time thing in Revelation. No, it's not. Revelation 5, similar language. The 4 living creatures, this is where it starts to get a little weird in Revelation. And the 24 leaders bowed in front of him. Each held a harp and a gold bowl full of incense, the prayers of God's people. Now, I highlighted that because I think he gives us a beautiful picture of how God feels about your prayers and my prayers. Okay? Incense is like a fragrant offering that would be burnt in the Old Testament temple. And the book of Revelation says, your prayers smell really good to God. Like it's like a sweet smelling, fragrant thing that gets offered before the Father. They sang a new song. The song went like this: you deserve to take the scroll and open the seals on it because you were slaughtered. They're speaking to Jesus. You bought people with your own blood to be God's own. Very familiar theme to Christians. They're from every tribe, language, people, and nation. You made them a kingdom and priests for our God. Isn't that interesting? When Revelation wants to describe what Jesus did with his sacrifice, it says 2 things. You freed them, you forgave them, and you made them priests. Who knew? A great church functions like a bunch of priests because it's who we are. Now, to be honest, that's a pretty new idea for me. It's probably a pretty new idea to you, but it begs another question. If you're going to live as a priest, and if I'm going to live as a priest, maybe we ought to know what we're supposed to do. What in the world are you supposed to do as a priest in Jesus' kingdom? Well, this is a question we ask all the time, isn't it? When you meet somebody new, at least adults ask this question. You're getting to know somebody, and you say, so what do you do? Or if they're retired, what did you do? Or even as students, if you want to talk about the future, what is it you want to do someday? College students meet each other. The question becomes, what are you majoring in, right? So what do you do? And a lot of answers that you get, you understand. I work in IT. Okay, don't really know what that is, but I know it's about technology and computers. I'll act like I know, but I don't really know. But IT, okay. I'm a mechanic. Okay, I can't fix anything, but I know what mechanics do. I'm a banker. I originate loans. Okay, I get it. Have you ever asked somebody what they did and they told you and you thought, what is that? Like, what kind of job is that? I had a friend describe this experience recently. They said that they asked somebody what they did for a living, and they said, I'm a high-value asset courier. And they thought, you're what? I'm a high-value asset courier. I said, well, how did you find this out? They said, well, it's a weird story. They were getting married. They were at a wedding shower surrounded by their parents and family. And one of their parents gave them a gift. It was a little box, but it was super heavy. And, you know, they were handed the box, and it was heavy. And so they started to wonder, what in the world is in this box? And one of their friends at the shower said, give it to me a second. And he took it, and he shook it, and he said, that's a box full of silver bars. What do you mean? Nobody's given us a box full of silver bars. What are you talking about? And they opened the present, and inside was, indeed, a box full of sterling silver bars. Which led to the question, how in the world did you know what that was? And they said, well, I'm a high-value asset courier. And they said, what in the world is a high-value asset courier? And they said, I get paid to deliver valuable things from one place to another. And I've delivered a box like this of precious metals. And I knew if it was that heavy, it probably was silver or gold, and I was erring on the side of silver so you wouldn't be disappointed, right? If you didn't open your box full of gold, which is worth a lot more. You know, this person delivers documents, they deliver antiques, sometimes they can even deliver people. Anything valuable from one place to another, often one country to another. That's not a job I've ever heard of, right? What in the world? But now you can sound smart this week. Oh yeah, if you ever thought about becoming a high-value asset courier, you should look into that. I'm not sure where you go to school or where you get trained, but apparently it's a thing. What if you told somebody, I'm a priest? They would say, what in the world are you talking about? What do you mean you're a priest? Yeah, everybody in our church is a priest. What kind of weird church is this? Well, it's a church like Jesus describes in the Bible. He says we're all priests, so what is it we are supposed to do with that? What did priests do in the Old Testament? They actually had a bunch of different things they did, but again, keeping it simple, I'm going to give you the top 2 jobs of the priest in the Old Testament, which, you know, spoiler alert, are our same 2 jobs as priests today, just in case you don't zone out in the next couple minutes. You're thinking, I checked out like 20 minutes ago, Fred. 2 things priests did in the Old Testament. They offered sacrifices to God, and they helped other people encounter God. So if you were a priest, if you're from the tribe of Aaron, you would come to the place, the temple where the sacrifices were offered, and it was your job to actually offer the sacrifices. Sometimes you could wave like produce in front of God. Sometimes you would burn incense. You could pour out wine. Sometimes it was your job to help slaughter animals and then put them on the fire. You actually could eat some of the animals later. This is how barbecue got started. I'm convinced it's a Jewish heritage that traces back a couple thousand years. And then you would also not only look to God, but you would help other people who wanted to offer their sacrifices do the same thing. So part of your attention is devoted to God. Part of your attention is devoted to other people who want to offer their sacrifices to God. You're kind of in the middle. You're a mediator is a word that's actually used of Jesus as our priest. So what do we do as priests? Well, the same thing, right? Before we get there, here's Deuteronomy chapter 10. This is a simplified version of the jobs of a priest. At that time, the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, and here's the purpose, to serve Him and to bless in His name until this day. This is what the priests did. This is what the Levites did. They served God. Another translation uses the word praise. And they blessed in His name. Now, who did they bless in His name? Well, they blessed people. So priests sacrifice to God, help other people do the same. Or, in a more simplistic way, and I'm a simplistic guy, their job was basically to bless God and bless people. To bless God with worship and to bless people in God's name. Now, what do we do today as priests? We're all learning. Some of us look shocked and surprised to find out we are priests for follower of Jesus. So what's our job? What do we do? About the same thing, with a different wrinkle. As a priest, a part of my job and yours is to offer sacrifices to God. But not all the sacrifices we read about in the Old Testament. And I'm here to tell you, I think that's a good thing. So this week, I was talking to a friend at church, and they said, yeah, we had like 10 wild turkeys come and roost in our trees. And I said, well, did you grab a shotgun and get one for Thanksgiving? And they said, Lord, no, it is way too much work to clean a turkey for Thanksgiving. Like, we're going to have, not only do we have to get the turkey, which isn't hard, but then we've got to defeather the turkey, got to get all the pen feathers, got to remove all the insides you really don't want to eat. And they said it's basically a lot easier to just go to the store and you can buy one that all that work's been done. And that led, I know a couple of our hunters are shaking their heads at me, but that was their statement, not mine. And I said, well, you know, isn't that funny? Like, it made me think about what worship used to look like in the Old Testament. You would bring your animals with you. Like, you know, somewhere you would have had a goat or some pigeons or a bull or a ram. And a part of the worship service would be sacrificing all of these animals. And I got to tell you, I like the way we do it better. It's not nearly as messy or stinky, although I do miss the barbecue part, Russ. I'm with you on that. Right? We don't offer animal sacrifices anymore. But the role of any believer in Jesus who is a priest is still to offer sacrifices. This is the way Peter frames it up in 1 Peter 2. You come to him as living stones, a spiritual house that's being built into a holy priesthood. So, this is the purpose, this is what you do with it. So offer spiritual sacrifices that God accepts through Christ Jesus. All priests offer sacrifices, but instead of animals or produce or wine or incense, we offer spiritual sacrifices. Now that sounds great, but what in the world does that mean? What does it mean for me or for you to offer spiritual sacrifices that God accepts so you can function as a priest? Well, here's the beginnings of an answer in the book of Romans chapter 12. Now, if you've been with us the last couple weeks, we've been in Romans 12 every single week. In Romans 12 is the picture of the church as a family. In Romans 12 is the picture of the church as a body. And at the very beginning of Romans 12 is this picture of the church as a group of priests who offer sacrifices. It's Romans 12:1. Brothers and sisters, in view of all we've just shared about God's compassion, I encourage you to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, dedicated to God and pleasing to Him. This kind of worship is appropriate for you. So God still wants sacrifices, but not animals, not produce, not incense. He wants us. And what do we offer? Do we offer an hour a week? Do we offer 30 minutes a day? Do we offer a certain percentage of money? Romans says, look, you offer it all. You say, okay, God, you can have all of me. And some of us think that's a lot to give God, and some of us think that's not giving God a lot to work with. But God, it's what we have. You can have all of me. Now, in a way, this feels right, because Jesus offered us all of Himself, even His very life, and He calls us to do the same. Right? So this is your sacrifice, to say to God every day, okay, God, I'm yours. What do you need? What is it you need me to offer today? I'm going to be around on Sundays. Maybe I'm going to give money. I'm going to use my talents. But actually, God, I'm yours, so you can have anything you want. Priests offer sacrifices, and there was a second job of a priest. A priest also helped other people encounter God. Or a priest blesses God, and a priest blesses others. Is this still a part of the work of believers today? Are believers called to help others hear and see the Jesus that they themselves have discovered? Now, this is how Peter frames it up again in all this talk about priesthood. He says, however, you are chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, people who belong to God. And then he tells you what you do about it. You were chosen to tell about the excellent qualities of God. If you're a believer, you're chosen to tell about how good God is. Well, who do you tell? You tell God Himself? That's good, that's worship, that's appropriate. Do we tell each other about how good God is? That's good. I love to hear about how God is working in people's lives. But doesn't it sound to you like Peter's saying, look, you're supposed to actually do this in your whole life? I want you to tell people who don't know how good God is, how good God is. Well, what do I tell, Fred? Because I don't know a lot. I'm not in seminary. I'm not a theologian. What do I tell? Peter, who is a very practical guy, I think understands that we're going to ask this question. He says, here's what you do. You go and tell people that once you weren't God's person, but now you are. And once you had not been shown mercy. You didn't think you needed it. You didn't think God would give it. You didn't care, but now you have been shown mercy. What do priests do? They talk about how good God's been to them. They talk about how real God has been in their lives. And they can tell God and they can tell other believers, but ultimately they tell the world about Him. That's what priests do. Or to frame it up even a little bit more simply, they simply do what Jesus taught us were the two biggest things people can do. Right? Matthew 22, maybe you've heard this before. Once somebody actually stops and asks Jesus a question, that they want to know how to boil down the whole Old Testament into one thing. Now, Matthew says they were trying to trap Jesus and test him, so I don't know that their motives were good, but I like what they're asking. I don't know if you picked up a Bible lately. There's a lot of stuff in the Old Testament. 600 and something different commandments. It's hard to keep and remember 600 and something different commandments. So I appreciate somebody saying, Jesus, could you just give us one? Like, that can be helpful, right? An expert in Moses' teachings tested Jesus by asking, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in Moses' teachings? If you had to just pick one, out of 613, I think, if memory serves. Maybe you know Jesus' answer. Jesus says, look, here's what you do. You love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Other translations would add all your strength. That sounds a lot like the living sacrifice piece, doesn't it? God, you can have all of me. Everything. My time, my energy, my talent. You get it all. It's all yours. This is the greatest and most important commandment. Now, Jesus was asked for one, but this is like a bonus pack where you get like 25%. I guess you get 100% more free. It's buy one, get one day with Jesus. Jesus says, I'm going to give you a second one. Because that one will get you pretty far, but you actually need another commandment if you're going to just stick to a couple things. So the second is like it. You love your neighbor as you love yourself. All of Moses' teachings and the prophets depend on these two commandments. If you want to understand what those 613 commandments were really about, they're about loving God, loving people.
Amen.
Or in the language I'm using this morning, I think this is what Jesus is saying. Look, as my priest, here's what you're going to do. You're going to bless God. You're going to love Him with all you are. You're going to offer yourself, and you're going to bless people. And there's a P in there now. There wasn't earlier today. You're going to bless people in God's name. You're going to love God. You're going to love your neighbor like you love yourself. So, one more question, and I think this could prove helpful for us this morning. We talked about who the priests are and what they do, but I think we benefit from asking ourselves, where do they work? Where do you as a priest and me as a priest, where do we do our work? Have you ever had a chance to go behind the scenes and see where somebody works? I mean, as kids, we love to do this. We go with our parents, and we know they disappear for work, but we don't really know where they work, and eventually maybe we get to go visit. Have you ever gotten to go visit where somebody famous works? Maybe you've been in the locker room of a professional athlete. Maybe you've been backstage at a concert. Maybe you've toured the White House or Congress if you've ever been to D.C. Years and years ago, my wife and I went to this house. And I wonder if anybody recognizes it. Not that you should. Anybody know whose house that was? What have you got? It's Hemingway's house. I knew this was the smart side over here. I'm just totally kidding. Right. See, guaranteed to alienate half the people instantly, right? Yeah. This is Ernest Hemingway's house, which is in Key West, Florida. And you can take a tour of Hemingway's house, and there are a lot of cats, which aren't my favorite, but there are lots and lots of cats. The best moment of the tour was when we got to this room. And it's not for the taxidermy animals, as some of you might think I'm going to say. It's because this is where Hemingway wrote some of his greatest works. And it's just a room, but at that table on the right-hand side, in that chair with that typewriter, arguably one of the greatest American authors did their work. Now, it's just brick and mortar, it's just walls, but there's something about standing there and thinking, man, this is where Hemingway actually wrote. It's crazy. Where do priests work? If you're a priest, where are you supposed to do all this priestly stuff of loving God and loving people? Well, where did the Old Testament priests work? You may or may not know this. They actually had a very physical location they worked. First, they worked in something called the tabernacle, which was kind of a portable, you could put it up and take it down, kind of a tent version of what later kind of morphed into the temple in Jerusalem. And this was a place where a piece of God's presence was said to dwell. Right? God lives everywhere, He's everywhere, but some special piece of His presence was in this building. So this is where the priests did their work. This is where you brought your offerings. This is where they helped other people bring their offerings. What about us? Where do we work as priests? Where do we offer our sacrifices? Is it in this building? Is this our temple? So we have Awana on Sunday nights for ages 2 to 5th grade, and a part of Awana is preparing a meal. And for this season of Awana, my wife and mother-in-law volunteered to take care of the meals, which means my father-in-law and I get drafted to help occasionally. And so I've been in our kitchen a good bit on Sunday nights. And there's a sign in the church kitchen here, you can go look at it for yourself after if you want, that reads this way: "This is God's house, but he doesn't do dishes. Please be responsible for any dishes you use." And every time I see the sign, it makes me smile, because I know the people who put it up were tired of washing other people's dishes, right? But the language in there is curious. This is God's house. Is this our new temple? Is this the only place we can offer our sacrifices? Now, I think this language can be helpful to some of us. It's good to remember that, these buildings were built with money that was given to God as an offering. It's good to remember this is the way we utilize these buildings. But is this the temple that has replaced the old temple? Listen to what Peter says when he talks about you and me as priests. He says, "You're coming to Christ, the living stone who was rejected by humans, but was chosen as precious by God. You come to him as living stones, a spiritual house that's being built into a holy priesthood." Peter here is tapping into this idea that God doesn't live in a building anymore. Instead, he lives in the hearts of people. If you know the story of Jesus, well, you might know that when Jesus died, the veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom. And whatever part of the Spirit of God used to dwell in that building left the building. And instead, the Spirit now lives in us. We are the temple of God. And so when we come together, we offer sacrifices in this building. But not just in this building. How many of you live here all week? Yeah. If I'm going to be a living sacrifice, I offer my sacrifices where I live. Right? I don't live here either. Although, I do know where the shower is and where the kitchen is, and I guess if I ever have to, right, the option's there. No, we offer our sacrifices here. This is a good space and a beautiful space and a space I'm grateful for, but we're not limited to this. You offer your sacrifices where you work and where you go to school and the athletic fields you play on and the coffee shops you frequent and anywhere you go. Well, how about the second function of a priest? Where do we do that? Where do we help other people encounter God? Here? Man, I hope so. I'll tell you, one of the things I love on Sundays is meeting somebody you brought to church with you. I love that. When you say, "Hey, this is my friend so-and-so, and they came this morning," and I know that when you say that, there's a bigger story behind it. There's been a lot of invitation and prayer and relationship building, and you stepped out and made that uncomfortable ask maybe, and man, I hope that when people come in and hang out with us, that they somehow encounter God in a way they haven't before. But again, I would ask, is this the only place we're supposed to help people encounter God? Let me show you a scripture we looked at last week that speaks to this. It's one that's often called the Great Commission in Matthew 28. When Jesus came near, he spoke to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So, wherever you go, make disciples of all nations." I was talking to Josh, our youth pastor, who you may not know is studying the translation of biblical languages. He's getting a master's and eventually a doctorate, in translating biblical languages, which means, one, Josh is a lot smarter than I am, and he knows a lot more about biblical translation than I do. And we were having lunch this week, and he said, "Hey, I really like the translation of that passage in Matthew 28. And I said, "Well, what do you like about it?" He said, "Well, often we translate this, 'go and make disciples.' Like it's something you do sometimes and not other times. Like it's something you only do on a missions trip. But most of your life, you're not making disciples." And he said, actually, the passage kind of reads, "as you are going," or "wherever you go." You and I have the task of blessing people in God's name, of showing them with our words and our actions what the love and message of Jesus is like. Right? Do we do it this building? Man, I hope so. But fortunately, we have the opportunity to do it every day. And again, I would say most of the people I know who need to experience God's love are not in this building. I bet most of the people you know who need to experience God's love are not necessarily in this building. And so we get to do it here, and we get to do it everywhere. So, wrapping up, I promise. Great churches bless God and their neighbors. Or great churches somehow find a way to embrace this ancient, weird idea of being priests. And they offer themselves to God, and then they look around them to see who they can help encounter God in their daily lives. So, as we're wrapping up, let me be really practical. I want to give us 2 questions to ask God this week. Because it's one thing to walk away with this idea that you're a priest and kind of put it in your pocket, and maybe you'll even pull it out and show it to somebody someday. Oh, did you know that if you're a Christian, you're actually a priest? We talked about that in church. But how do we function like priests? 2 questions for you as we're finishing up. And I would encourage you to ask God these questions this week. First, Lord, what can I offer you this week? Like, it's one thing to say, God, it's all yours. But what if we each said, okay, God, what specifically do you need from me this week? I don't even need anything, but what do you want me to offer? Is there a part of my life I've been kind of shutting you out of? And you've been saying, hey, I want that part too? Is there a block of time this week, God, that I honestly wasn't thinking about using in some way to serve you or serve other people, but maybe you're saying to me, hey, I can use that time you've got. You've got the whole thing, heart, soul, mind, strength, but what specifically, God, would you show me what I can offer this week? And then secondly, simple question, who can I bless? Who can I bless this week in your name so that they get a picture of who you are and what you're like? I guarantee you there are people in your life who could stand to be blessed in the name of God this week. People in my life who could stand to be blessed in the name of God. And I'll offer this to you because I think I just entered our family story a little bit this week. There are probably some really lonely people around you who, if you would just offer them your attention, if you would ask them how they are and then just sit and listen, they would be blessed in the name of Jesus. Because there may be people, they may be busy people, but nobody actually ever listens to them. All right, so as I say, who can you bless? I don't mean who can you give money, although that's fine. Who can you invite to church, although please do. But who can you be a blessing to this week? Because that's what priests do. They bless God and they bless people. And a great church focuses on doing those 2 things that Jesus taught. Next Sunday, if you're back with us, we'll give you a taste of where we're headed. We're going to talk about this idea that a great church actually does what Jesus taught. A great church just doesn't study what Jesus taught or memorize what Jesus taught. A great church says, okay, Jesus, if that's what you tell us to do, we will do that. And I can tell you personally, as you probably know, that's challenging stuff. And so if you want to be challenged and encouraged, we'd love to have you back next week. At this time, before our band comes, we actually are going to receive a